Good afternoon, everybody. This is the Whispering Gentleman. The days of summer are creeping up upon us, leading us closer to the spooky season. I'm feeling a little bit extra spooky myself tonight, so here's 3 stories that will help you fall asleep tonight, or hopefully keep you terrified. I stumbled upon a gas station on an empty highway several years ago. That night at the gas station still haunts me today. But not necessarily. I had been driving on the empty highway for a couple hours in my car. Just as I was about to fall asleep, the car let out a ding to let me know that the fuel was running low. I was tired. Very tired. It had definitely not been a good idea to decide to take a drive home at night instead of booking a room in a motel. I looked at the never-ending road and the thick forest lining along it. The headlights illuminated what was otherwise the darkest night I'd ever seen. Not a single star dotted the dark cloud-dominated sky. There was no one on the road, and the monotony of the same forest mile after mile was starting to take a toll on me. I watched as the forest blurred beside me after I steadily pressed my foot on the accelerator. There must have been a gas station somewhere around here. I spotted one, right between the lines of trees that populated either side of the road. It stuck out like a sore thumb amongst the dark trees. Dim lights did a poor job of illuminating the station and gave it a run-down, neglected feel. I ignored all red flags as I pulled up to the station and parked my car in one of the bays to refuel it. The dim white lights overhead seemed to give me a slight migraine. They were intensely white, but very dim. I saw no other cars in the bay. The gas pump was old and slightly damaged, but it did the job and filled my tank. After filling my car, I started to walk towards the convenience store to pay. The heavy glass doors were unlocked and the lights inside were on. I pushed open the door and walked inside. The place felt like it hadn't been updated since the 80s. A retro tiled floor combined the products that I either hadn't heard of or were from old brands led me to this conclusion. The shopkeeper caught me staring at the aisles of old products that had been discontinued a long time ago and spoke. "Is there anything wrong, sir?" he asked, making me jump. I had somehow only noticed his presence now, and even he represented the 80s, having dressed in a striped button-up shirt and slacks. He sported an impressive mustache, thin spectacles, and had an air of mystery around him. No. Just came here to pay for the gas and, buy a coffee?" I said, still collecting myself. I walked over to the counter while filling my pockets to search for my wallet. I must have left it back at the car. "I'll be right back. I forgot my wallet," I told the shopkeeper. He flashed me a knowing smile. There was something wrong with his teeth, but I didn't register it as I quickly whipped around to go to my car. They were rotting as I stepped out of the convenience store and began my walk towards my car, when I noticed I wasn't getting any closer to my car. It didn't make sense. There was a short distance between my car and the shop, yet no matter how much I walked, I covered no distance. It was like the ground had turned into a treadmill, and no matter how far I walked, I never got closer to my car. I looked behind me and realized I was still a step or two from the entrance of the convenience store. I saw the shopkeeper staring at me through the glass doors with an indescribable expression. His face was neutral, yet the way his eyes focused on me fueled a strong sense of apprehension within my soul. I ran, now more frantic than before. Paying for the fuel was no longer a priority. I wanted to get to my car and book it. It was all futile. No matter how fast I ran, I never made it to my car. The nightmare didn't stop. How long do you think you would have kept running in my situation? I was defeated and knew I could not fight whatever force was acting upon this place. I had made a mistake of ever stopping by, and now I was paying for it. The very laws of physics were being bent in this place, and I still could not understand how walking forward never seemed to help me actually physically move forward. Panic surged through my veins as my desire to free myself from this loop grew into an animalistic urge for survival. Nothing worked. I could only have run for so long before I collapsed, unable to run any further. When faced with this defeat, I had no choice but to walk back inside the convenience store and face the shopkeeper, who had continually stared at me throughout the struggle. As I turned around, I seemed to snap out of that cycle, and my steps actually allowed me to move forward. I burst through the glass doors and screamed at the shopkeeper. "What is happening?" He smiled, a wide smile that stretched from ear to ear. There was something wrong with his mustache. I squinted and noticed that it was pulsating and worthing with maggots. There were dozens of them, wriggling around in his bushy mustache and climbing into his nostrils. My scream echoed several times in the small convenience store and was followed by the shopkeeper's hysterical laugh. I tried to run out of the glass doors again and slammed my body against them to open them. They didn't budge. The blow knocked the wind out of my body, causing my lungs to feel like deflated balloons. A dull, excruciating pain spread across my entire torso. My vision swam, and I lay there on the floor struggling to recover. I don't know how long I lay there as the waves of pain flowing through my torso began to fade away. But when I found the strength to get back up off the floor and look around, the shopkeeper was gone. The place looked near, like it had been constructed a couple months ago. The cobwebs that once stretched over the shelves were now gone, and the tiled floor was whiter. The fluorescent lights above also seemed to shine brighter. A deep, primal instinct to escape resided in my gut, but the glass doors wouldn't open no matter how hard I pushed against them, like they were held in place by a physical barrier. I stared through the glass at my car, and I suddenly wanted to be out of there in the cool night air instead of being trapped inside this gas station. It felt as if the outside resided in a different dimension, and the interdimensional barrier between the glass and the outside kept me from going back outside. It was a viable theory, considering how old this place seemed when I walked in, only to have it suddenly renewed as if time itself had ticked back. A low moan reverberated through the air, catching my attention immediately. My thoughts about my current dilemma completely flew out of my head as the sound caused every single one of my senses to stand on end. I slowly looked behind me and noticed a corpse behind me. The body was burnt. The skin was charred and black in some places, and red and raw in the others. The face of the corpse was completely disfigured. Her left eye was missing. Part of her seemed to have melted onto the floor due to the extreme heat. I jumped back and had a strong urge to empty my stomach onto the floor. Bile rose to the back of my throat, but I swallowed it back down. I slowly walked away from the corpse and turned around into the aisle to avoid it. I could not bear looking at the body without feeling the pain the person must have felt as they were burnt alive. Much to my dismay, I nearly stepped on another burnt corpse in the next aisle. It was similar to the last one and finally gave my stomach the push it needed to empty all of its contents onto the floor. A significant portion of my vomit landed on the burnt corpse itself and seeped into the burnt and separated tissues. I started to gag even more violently at the sight of the scene, but my stomach had nothing else to expel. Walking into another aisle led me to the third and final corpse in this place. Those poor people seemed to have all been burnt in this place. There was no evidence of a fire ever occurring in the convenience store as I walked around it though, and I obviously would have always burnt to my demise had there been a fire a short while ago. These bodies seemed to have peered within the disappearance of the shopkeeper. I heard movement behind me. This was followed by the sound of something being dragged against the floor. It almost had a squeak to it, as if a wet, heavy sponge was being pushed over the tiles. I stood completely frozen in fear. Suddenly, something grabbed at my leg. More shuffling sounds followed from my left. Another thing grabbed my leg. It felt like a hand. Its grip was weak and faltering. My heart skipped a beat as the third had joined them and gripped at my leg. I was frozen in fear, and my heart was violently bashing against my chest. It felt like I was having a heart attack. "Help us!" 3 mangled voices moaned. Then they used their hands to slowly climb up my legs and stand up using me as support. I still couldn't see what was grabbing at me as they were behind me. A mixture of dry, burnt flesh and a wet, pus-filled wounds rubbed against my bare hand as one of them reached up and grabbed at my hand. I slowly turned my head to look down at what was grabbing me and came face to face with the lifeless eyes of the burnt corpse. All 3 of them were focused on standing up by slowly crawling up my body. This somehow snapped me out of my paralysis. I shook them off me like a scorpion had gotten into my pants and lunged forward, nearly falling on the floor myself. It was then that I realized that a fire had started to spread throughout the place. The black smoke reduced my visibility and made it incredibly hard to see. The corpses continued to crawl towards me, inch by inch, as the fire began to consume every inch of the store. Unbearable heat radiated onto my skin and deep into my body as I began to slowly burn in this hell. I ran aimlessly through the store as the fire looked at me and extended its tendrils to consume me. It felt as if layers of my skin were starting to melt off. I bumped against a solid surface and felt a burning metal handle on my stomach. In desperation, I burnt my hand to turn that handle and opened the door. I found myself in a toilet. The fire had not spread through here, but smoke was licking in through the sides of the door. I may not die in the fire, but I would soon succumb to suffocation. What was happening to me? I struggled to come up with an explanation in my mind for the predicament I found myself in. I had walked into a gas station to pay for my fuel, and now suddenly this place was on fire. Where did the shopkeeper go to? And why were there maggots in his face? Where had the corpses appeared from? The rising temperature of the enclosed room snapped me out of my thoughts and urged me to take action. I spotted a medium-sized window right above the toilet that I could break and use to get out of the store. I smashed the glass with my fist and punched it several more times to clear the window. Shards of glass were embedded into my knuckles, but my primal need for survival kept me going. The window was just barely big enough for me to crawl through. My head went through easily. It felt like crawling through a shark's teeth. Glass stabbed into me and formed long slices as I pushed myself out through the window. I hadn't removed all the glass from the window, and the sharp bits remaining on the edges dug into me and drew linear cuts on my whole body. My entire torso was burning in pain, and as I continued to push myself through the window with all my strength, I started to wonder whether dying in the fire would have been less painful. I managed to get myself through, though, except I hadn't accounted for one thing. Since I dove headfirst out of the window, there was no way for me to land on my feet. I could swear I heard my skull crack open as my head slammed against the asphalt. As I heard the dull thud of my body hitting the floor after, my vision started to tunnel. In one single moment, I felt the pain across my entire raw, burnt, and cut body. In the next moment, that pain seemed to lift me off as my consciousness faded away like a candle being blown. Several days later, I found myself waking up in a hospital, surrounded by the beeps of machinery. I was covered from head to toe in casts, and my entire body hurt. The doctors told me I was found outside of an old abandoned gas station. They speculated my body had been dumped by a supposed kidnapper who had tortured me to death and tried to burn my body as well. They told me I had brain damage and severe memory loss when I tried to tell them the true story. I was a traumatized maniac to them. I managed to recover in the hospital as months and years passed. After I successfully went through rehabilitation, only my physical and mental scars remained. Today, I drove to that same gas station. The window that I had crawled out of that horrific night several years ago was still broken. I didn't stop there, and instead continued driving. As I passed the gas station, I saw that same shopkeeper I had met the night staring at me through the glass double doors with a malicious smile spread across his face. I woke up in my local shopping mall in the middle of the night. There's this thing chasing me, but not necessarily. A chill down my spine roused me from the deep, dreamless sleep. I was sleeping on a hard, cold surface. I slowly opened my eyes and looked around in the dark. At first, my mind was completely blank. And then, a million questions passed through my head as my eyes adjusted to the dark, and I recognized the dark shopping mall that I was in. Dim lights were on in various places. They did a poor job of illuminating the mall. I looked down and realized I was sleeping on a bench in the middle of the mall. How did I get here? I tried to focus on the last thing I could remember. I was walking around the shopping mall. Wait, what was I there for? Yes, I was there to buy groceries. No, I was going to buy clothes. I shook my head in an attempt to clear my thoughts. I was walking around the shopping mall. There was this lady, or was it a man? They were wearing a black coat? No, it was a blue jacket. Every time I tried to replay my previous memories, they seemed to dissolve into other memories until I wasn't certain of anything. The only thing that remained consistent was the memory of me walking into the shopping mall. I got off of the bench and decided to forget about how I got here and move my focus on getting out of here and going home. My parents must be getting worried for me. What is the time? I instinctively reached into my pocket as my mind started to wander again. My heart skipped a beat. My fingers searched for the familiar smooth surface of my phone in my pocket, but I could not find it. I frantically searched my other pocket and realized that my phone was not with me. Fear seemed to flow in my veins like a strong drug as I realized that I could no longer call for help. Anxious thoughts clouded my mind until I could no longer form any coherent thoughts. The panic and gravity of my situation had set in fully. I need to get out of here. It's just a mall. I just have to go to the nearest exit. I walked around and tried to get my bearings. I visited this mall frequently and knew the place like the back of my hand, but in the dark, this place was completely different. The absence of the usual cacophony of people's noises made this place seem liminal, let alone knowing where the nearest exit was. I struggled to even figure out which floor I was on. Perhaps what made this worse was the absence of my phone, which I could have used to call for help or even as a flashlight to navigate. I suddenly recognized the big cinema entrance in front of me as I walked towards it. Everything started to click in my head, and I realized I was on the 3rd floor. My memory of how I got here started to clear up. I was coming out of the cinemas with my friends. We had just finished watching. What had we watched? I wasn't even sure if the sudden flashback I got was true. For all I know, it could have been a memory from the past. I've been to the cinema multiple times. Discounts come as a perk for the residents of my town. The cinema had a fire escape that led directly outside. This was the closest exit to me. The next closest one would involve navigating down a couple of escalators to get to the ground floor. In the dark, this task would be nearly impossible. I walked into the cinema. The whole place was unsettling in a way that I could not place. The lighting was bright enough to allow me to see the outlines of objects, but was too dim to make out any details. My gut instincts urged me to run out of there, but I continued in hope of getting out through the fire escape. I walked past the reception. My feet made soft thuds against the carpet. Past the reception was a hallway leading to various. My heart raced inside my chest, and I could swear my heartbeats were echoing around the space. I walked down the hallway, despite every part of my body telling me not to. It was dead silent. Every one of my steps were amplified. I walked down the hallway and past the double doors leading to each theater room. I quickened my pace to a jog. My mind was brimming with an unsettling feeling. A figure walked past me. I froze and whipped my head around. There was nothing. I was just being paranoid. I resumed my walk. In the back of my head, a new thought arose. I thought I desperately wanted to ignore him, but as I walked down the hallway, it became more and more apparent. I should have been at the end of the hallway by now. It was taking too long. I broke into a full sprint. The double doors blurred at my sides as I ran in desperation of reaching the end of the hallway. I ran past a figure. The sudden intrusion made me trip and fall flat on the floor. As soon as my palms touched the floor, I felt them get coated in a liquid. Instinctively, I pulled my hands away from the mysterious liquid. Why was there water on the floor? As I got up and looked behind me, I was face to face with a figure that I had passed. The figure had a smooth face with no features except for large white eyes. They were large, comically large, and so white they had a glow. They were bloodshot with thin red veins running all through the eye. The pupils were small, almost the size of a pinhead, and were pitch black. I fell backwards and let out a yelp. The creature stayed completely still. Adrenaline soared through my veins as I scrambled to my feet and started running away from the creature. I continued to stay frozen in the same place. Those horrible eyes followed me as I ran further and further away. I stopped to catch my breath when I ran a safe distance away from the creature. The hallway had still not come to an end, and it only seemed to be getting darker and darker. I kept on seeing a turn in the hallway further ahead, but no matter how far I walked, it seemed to stay the same distance away from me, like it was just a mirage in the desert. Just a mirage, a flicker of hope, a pond of water in a dry desert. I looked away and headed for one of the double doors leading to the theaters. As soon as I opened the doors, a blinding white light nearly fried my eyes. I used my hand to shield my eyes and waited for them to adjust to the new lighting after having been in the dark for so long. The theater screen was showing me walking around the mall, and then suddenly the screen darkened and transitioned into me walking through the mall in the dark. It showed me the entire journey up until the point at which I walked into the theater room, and to my surprise the film did not stop. In fact, it continued, playing into the future. I would continue watching the film for a while before I would walk to the front of the theater and reach the doors marked with green exit signs. There, I would face the same creature halfway through the exit hallway. The creature would reach out to me with the deep black tentacles and would crush me with them. I whimpered in horror as I watched the graphic video of me getting impaled by those horrible black tentacles. The screen turned to black and turned off after the video ended. I stood there in inexplicable horror, still staring at the screen that foretold the future like some sick fortune teller. I looked beside the massive theater screen and saw the door marked with green exit signs. I had three choices: exit door, stay, or back to hallway. Out of the three, I struggled to pick one. As I stood there, I started to hear the eerie creak of the exit door slowly opening. I stared at the door as the creature came out of it and looked directly at me with those large white bloodshot eyes. I quickly turned around and ran back into the hallway, but this time, something was different. I cried tears of relief when I saw the hallway had come to an end and the fire escape door was right there. I walked out of the fire escape door and suddenly, the sunlight outside seared my retinas after having spent so long in the dark. I took my eyes quite a bit to adjust to the daylight, and then it hit me. It wasn't nighttime at all. The mall should be open. I stepped back inside the mall through the fire escape and saw lots of people walking around in and out of the theater rooms. Walking out of the cinema, the whole mall was empty. In dark moments before I left, it was now full with the usual bustle of shoppers. My phone was on the same bench as the one I had woken up on. If you like this story, be sure to check out more stories by Not Necessarily on Reddit linked in the description below. As always, sleep tight and stay terrified. You know that feeling you get when you realize that you're a fucking loser? No? Well, I sure do. Happens most nights after I leave the casino. It creeps up on me during my walk over to the bar like a rage that wants to crawl up from the pit of my stomach and destroy something. So I do my best to keep it stuffed down. Alcohol seems to work best. That's not my problem though. It's just a byproduct. Gambling? Now that's another story. That's my weakness. Or sickness. Depends on who you ask. I asked my ex-wife's opinion on the matter once. She said something like, "If you don't quit drinking, I'm fucking leaving, Brian." I mean it. Lovely gal. She had a penchant for slamming doors and giving me shit. Wasn't much for philosophical debates though. Ever since she tested the integrity of my door's hinges for the final time, I'd been on a particular bad bender, a losing streak like no other. So there I was, idly sipping vodka and peering out the pub's grimy window, taking in the empty street, watching the raindrops collect against the glass, when my luck finally changed. The approaching headlights shone in at me, blinding me momentarily. I squinted out a sleek black luxury sedan, probably a Cadillac or something even nicer. I don't even know. I've never been a car guy, but it was impressive nonetheless. Its owner exited swiftly, wearing an expensive-looking suit that was absolutely drenched in flashy dress shoes. What was this guy doing here? He stuck out like a sore thumb among the crowd of sad sacks and outcasts inhabiting this dingy pub. He pushed through the door, stopping to shake the water off from his shoulders and slick back his sopping hair from his eyes before surveying the bar. For all the fancy clothes he had on, his face wore the features of a haunted man. He chose a spot at the bar, a few seats down from me, ignoring my lingering eyes. I heard him mutter something to the bartender, who I never stayed sober long enough to remember the name of, and place a $100 bill on the counter. If he knew any better, he wouldn't be flashing money around like that in this neighborhood, I thought, torn between jealousy and concern for him. The bartender poured him a shot and set the bottle down in front of him. I noticed his hands were shaking as he threw back his first shot and hastily prepared for the next. He took his next three in short order, sighing loudly after his last. He glanced over at me with the same haunted expression. He grunted, took out another 100, and tossed it at the bartender, grabbing the bottle and making his way back into the night. I'll admit, I'm an opportunist. Here was a stranger who clearly in the midst of some crisis, throwing money around like it was nothing, and the gears began to turn in my cloudy head. Perhaps I could use this to my advantage. I sprinted out after him, letting my stool fall to the floor in my haste. He was nearly to his car when I caught up with him. "Hey, excuse me. Can you spare some cash, mate?" He froze, his back to me. I expected him to ignore me, maybe tell me to piss off, but I didn't expect the fury in his eyes when he finally turned around. His lips curled into a snarl, his hands clenched into fists. I mumbled some sort of apology before I started to slink away, surprised when he reached forward and put his hand on my shoulder, pulling me towards him aggressively. His crazed eyes bore into mine while his mouth quivered like he was struggling to keep words what he wanted to say inside. Gradually, his grip relaxed. Yes, here, take this. Please, take this from me," he said, presenting a wallet that was bursting at the seams. "Take it now," he commanded after I hesitated. Still uncertain, I reached for it. As soon as it was in my hand, he turned away. I opened the wallet, thumbing through the bills. There's nearly $1,000 inside. No credit cards, no IDs, just cash. "It will only cause you pain," he shouted before slamming his door shut, leaving me stunned in the pouring rain. Now, a wallet full of money is a hell of a thing to squander. But squander I did. It only took a couple of days and a few unwise bets for me to have nearly exhausted my funds. Should have used it to pay off some debts, but I had a feeling, a really good feeling about betting with this stranger's money. I figured the universe had given me a gift, so maybe I could capitalize on it. I don't know why I was surprised, but I don't know why I felt so betrayed. I had a chance too. I'd been up for a while, but I got greedy. and I couldn't stop myself. Following an all too familiar trajectory of self-loathing, I found myself back in the same shitty pub, sipping vodka once more, intent on pissing the remaining $50 away. I tossed the bills at the bartender, who I never stayed sober long enough to remember the name of. He scoffed at me. Nice fucking tip. In my drunken haze, I saw red, and I slammed the glass into the counter. But the obscenities I planned for him quickly turned to ones of pain as the glass shattered and dug deep into my palm. "Alright, psycho. Get the hell out of here. Don't bother coming back," he shouted, pointing me to the door. I didn't need to be told twice. Fuck. I winced, trying to pull the pieces of glass from my hand on my walk home. They were really in there. After a while, I gave up, wrapping my jacket around the wound and doing my best to ignore the dull throbbing. I decided I would deal with it the next day. Once I got inside, I simply crawled into bed, watching the ceiling spin and cursing myself for leading such a miserable existence. The next morning, or really it was the afternoon by the time I awoke, wasn't very forgiving of the night before. I felt nauseous, and my hand was burning. It took me a little while to remember why it was wrapped up in my coat. I turned over, mentally preparing myself to climb out of bed when my eyes fell on my nightstand, or rather, what was on top of it. The wallet. It was stuffed, overflowing in fact. Disregarding my injured hand, I feverishly thumbed through it, elated to find that there were $5,000 inside. I tossed the bills on my bed, laughing in disbelief. But how did they get there? How could it be? I could have almost believed that the night before had been a dream, but my raging hangover and the glass shards in my palm were proof to the contrary. It just didn't make any sense. I sat there for a long while, staring down at the black leather that was now speckled with my dried blood, and I unwrapped my hand and looked down at the wound, glancing back and forth between it and the wallet. I found myself recalling what the man who surrendered the mysterious wallet had said. It will only cause you pain. Once I understood, there was no turning back. I tried not to think about it as I swung the hammer into my fingers. The sound of bone crunching was sickening, and the pain exploded through my mangled digits. Ah! Damn! Fuck! I screamed, my eyes watering. I gritted my teeth and checked the wallet again. Incredibly, there were more bills. But as I counted them, I realized it was a decidedly smaller sum. $400. What the hell? That hurt worse than the glass, I yelled at the wallet. Fortunately, it didn't reply. Alright, let's try that again. Close my eyes, bite my shirt. Another swing, another crunch. Stars of pain in my eyes. Obscenities. $150 more. What? You don't like that? That's not enough for you? I growled, examining my mangled, swollen, bloody, glass-filled hand. I paced the room, seething. Okay, you want some pain? I'll give you some fucking pain. I took a pair of pliers with me to the bathroom, propping the wallet up against the wall so it could watch. I don't know. It feels foolish in the hindsight, but I wanted to make sure I could see. I picked a molar, something that wouldn't be so visible. I clamped the pliers around it and braced myself. I vigorously began wiggling against the tooth, building pressure until I could feel it start to move. Blood leaked from my gums and mixed with my saliva, making it nearly impossible to keep my grip on the tooth. The pliers slipped off more than a few times. I was getting more and more frustrated by the second. I needed both hands to pull it out. I forced my injured hand to my face, using it to support the other. I squeezed the pliers around my tooth as hard as I could and loosened it from my gum. More and more blood poured out as I pulled. Almost there. Almost there. Almost. I could feel that the root was on the verge of tearing away. I clamped down even harder to keep from slipping off at the last second. Instead, My tight grip ended up crushing my motor into pieces before I was able to get it all the way out. The howl I let out was deafening, and gripped the sink to keep myself from fainting. I swayed back and forth, swallowing the thick, irony mixture that filled my mouth. Oh, better be worth it. I grimaced, picking up the wallet. I threw it to the ground when I saw a meager payout within. What do you want? What more can I do? I demanded. I dragged my razor across my cheeks. I punched my mirror. I bashed my face into the sink. With each effort, the wallet awarded me with less and less, until I was finally given nothing for my efforts. I screamed down at it, half in anger, half in pain. The room tilted viciously, and I slumped down beside it, out of breath and furious. You won't. More? I gasped, a realization hitting me. You want more than my pain. You need more than just mine. I thought back to the man again, his car, his clothes, that haunted look on his face. What had he done to have so much? How many people had he harmed? How far had he been willing to go? How far will I?